Welcome, everybody, to the Wine Tech Insiders Podcast, episode 18. We're going to be talking about more supply chain issues, an ancient discovery, and Prince Charles's booze cruise. Let's get going. Okay, I just want to say one thing. We last 2 weeks ago, we were on Oushinery's podcast. We tweeted about it. But if you want to hear what we had to say, especially around selling wine, go to Oushinery and check it out. All right, more supply chain worries. First, Argentinian vineyards can't get bottles. They had a fire in Mendoza at a bottle factory. And they've said, we've never lived through a shortage like this. We have paper shortages in Napa because there's global paper shortage, and Sauvignon Blanc, for a number of reasons, might not even be on shelves this Christmas, although it might not be the best time, depending where you are in the world, to drink Sauvignon Blanc. What do we think? Seb, why don't you jump in? What's going on in the world? Maybe have an overall view of this. Have you heard other issues with supply chains issues? What's going on?
Look, I think that there's definitely a few angles to this. This is not just wine specific. Of course, by now, everyone has heard of chip shortages. Everyone has heard of the ports being clogged up. And the biggest problem is that most of the economies around the world have underestimated how fast the consumption would resume. So ultimately, supply chain issues are throughout everywhere. It's bottles quite clearly in Argentina. But we have a supplier in Italy who's basically saying cork is also becoming a bit of a challenge because of global change. Production is fluctuating. This being said, if we have a look at cork specifically, cork in the 70s and 80s was very difficult to get in Australia, or a good quality cork, and that led to the creation of the screw cap, the invention of the screw cap by Australians. And now I'm thinking, especially on the bottle front, there has been a challenge with packaging in the wine industry. Right, so the bottle itself, the newer generations kind of really want a smaller format, kind of really want a good to go kind of format. So maybe there's an opportunity out of this. It's yet to be seen, but I also do think that overall there's going to be supply, logistics, deliveries, sales to be delivered as well for the next 12 to 18 plus months for sure.
Yeah, but we've been seeing a bit at Oushinery, and it's just very challenging for wineries. And the biggest one we work with, they suddenly accept compromise that would have not been able even 6 months ago. They're just like, okay, so we have this production, I'm making it up here, of Cabernet Sauvignon, and we can't have enough glass to put all of it in there. Well, we're going to get two different bottle shapes, and suddenly they're less precious. It's like a wine needs to bottle, it needs to get out of the barrel. And it's just like, so we have this bottle and this bottle, and it's not going to be exactly the same market. And so it's just like, as a packaging designer by trade, it's a bit like, this is not hot. But at the same time, it's just like, you got to compromise and get the product on the shelves and everything like that. So it's been very interesting to see that and adaptability. And I think it's probably something that just sprung from COVID, right? It's just, I think I've been a bit impressed how the wineries have been able to just that's another curveball. What do we do the most out of it? But I don't envy them, or even industries at large, Seb was mentioning, just seeing the ports and everything. It's just, because it seems a bit like climate change. It seems so out of what can we do about it, right? That's a bit hopeless.
Yeah. Well, I think it's tied back in, like you were saying, Laurie, about COVID. I mean, the first thing that COVID did to the wine industry was force it to digitalize, because you couldn't go to trade shows anymore. You couldn't physically meet your suppliers like you could pre-COVID, and the industry stepped up and switched to digital, and now has been quite successful with doing everything or a lot more things digitally than ever before. And so maybe that also helps everybody be in a flexible mindset that we've made it work and we're going to continue to make it work. And maybe there's some environmentally positive things that come out of this, that if you end up moving away from glass, which is arguably the most environmentally unfriendly format out there due to all of the logistics costs associated with the heavy glass bottles, and for a lot of entry-level wines, I mean, I'm going to get my hand slapped, but how many of those entry-level wines actually can you tell the difference that they were in a can or in a bag or in a bottle or a screw cap or a cork? And if a consumer wants to drink and they see suddenly wines that are familiar to them, but just in a slightly different packaging, how many consumers are actually going to care? And then actually then it'll be easier because I don't have to worry about my a bottle breaking through the bag in my shopping bag. It's it's a box, and it's not going to bust. And
I used to live in Scandinavia, like I did both Oslo and Stockholm, where bag in a box, more for economical reason, because like alcohol is so expensive there, is like a huge thing. I would say like easily a third of their government liquor stores are bag in a box, but like we're talking some nice wine bag in a box, and we're talking fancy bag in a box. Again, as packaging, there is foil, embossing, and each time, like, it's just like, it was wonderful to purchase like this. Like you get used a bit to it because you look like a wino, like just carrying like 6 liters of wine like home all at once. But at the same time, it's wonderful as an experience. It doesn't look cheap. Like just the perception of drinking bag in a box in Scandinavia is if anything, you have a smart one, like, compared to buying the glass bottle. So if you can come a bit more to the rest of the world, I'm all for it, because I'm in this right now from Canada, and the options that we have for bag in a box are very low market. Like you don't really want to drink that, but I think it's a missed opportunity. So I'm curious to see that. Actually.
You sound like a snub.
I'm French. I can be snub, right?
Well, I can pull it off. Yep.
Well, I still like recall going to Italy on holiday and going into the local wine outlet, and you have your bottles that you can put in, and then you get to the end and basically you pull up with a gas nozzle, and being able to fill up your 5-gallon jug as if you were pumping gas. And it's geared towards how you consume wine in the area, and it works just like in Sweden or Scandinavia with bag and box.
It's interesting because this also exists in Quebec. I know that the SAQ over there, they have shops called SAQ Depot, and they basically buy wine in bulk, and they allow consumers to come back with their own bottle and fill their own bottle. So I wonder if this means that Argentinian wine, currently struggling with glass, might flow into new markets for these exact same reasons. Oh, look, it's an opportunity.
Yeah.
Also, in the last few weeks, there was a big discovery, a winery in Israel known as Vinum Gaztium, which was apparently famous in the literature at the time. And they found it dates back 1,500 years and produced one of the finest white wines in the Mediterranean, about 2 to 3 million liters of wine a year. Jonathan, how big is that as a winery? Where does that put?
Well, I mean, especially if you put it in context to back then, I mean, it sounds like they were almost the Gallo, the Gallo of the epoch, taking care of the wine, of all the wine consumers. So the production is even large by today's standards. So absolutely.
Maybe this gets back to Seb's idea of this idea that we had the gas tank or the big, we should go back to this, maybe big jars or something in the store. We can
minus the slave laborers, right? Like it's just
Right. Right.
like they were
I mean,
the
it's a fair
fancy
point.
slaves. They were the classes of slaves, like the wine working wineries were the fancy one. And I mean fancy, this, like they were allowed to drink the must. So they would have they were the only slave that could have a bit of the must and get a bit of a buzz. All the other slaves were not allowed alcohol in the Roman era and everything. Just little culture. I did like with my team at Oushinery, we did like an online Airbnb experience with an Italian guide from Napoli, and he explained to us like he did his whole like PhD on like winemaking and amphora in the Roman time. So that's how I know about it. That was in the world of slave, that was a good one to be, even though it was grueling hours and a ton of work, but you get a buzz. So it's a lot of slaves that got buzz for 1 million liters of production.
And do we know, I mean, the interesting question here is with regards to that wine, we're talking hundreds and thousands of years ago, right? Mm-hmm. That wine being classified as fine wine. Do we have any indication as to how fine wine 3,000 years ago compared with today's fine wine? Was it comparable as a product in terms of quality, or was it just fine for the day?
So again, just from that, learning experience, it was very different wine. Like first, it was always spices, and it was always double, like almost most likely always double fermented. So it's wine, it goes to like 12% or something like that. Then they put honey and spices to crank it up to like 15 to 16%. But fun story, like Caesar, was a fan of white wine. So it's also like the fashion of the moment was, what was the emperor drinking? Well, Caesar is drinking white wine, then everybody's drinking white wine. It was like the influencer, if you will, of the time. But I think from what I understood, it was really hard to compare because it's more like almost sweet, it's sweet, it's delicious. Like we did a couple of like cocktails and everything like that. It's very boozy. And also it's never cold, right? Like it's just like the coldest bakes. That's also the bake they didn't have obviously fridges and everything. So there's a lot of different parameters as well, even in the degustation of it.
That's interesting. Yeah. And for reference, 2 to 3 million liters is roughly about 375,000 cases of wine. So when we're saying today that a vast majority of producers, 94 to 97%, producing less than about 25,000 cases, then 300,000 cases is huge, and the gallows are definitely in the million cases. So it's definitely a world apart.
Yeah. Well, while we're looking back to this era, one of the things that my wife and I found out on a tour of Munich is that in this era, it was a major trading center for two products: salt, coming over from Salzburg in Austria, and wine. So there was a salt street, and the wine street crossed the salt street, and so you'd come into Munich to do your salt trading, and you'd be plied with wine.
That's interesting. And look, it's also, I think it's part of the overall appeal of the product. It's existed for millenniums, and it can be as simple and as untouched and as natural as possible, or now with techniques that we've developed can be manipulated and made into something different. Mm-hmm. So yeah, fascinating. I just don't know enough about the history of winemaking.
Well, after we talked a few podcasts ago about Le Mans running on a bunch of cars in Le Mans running on wine leftovers, we learned that Prince Charles has an Aston Martin that is running off of surplus English white wine. Laurie, do you think it's because he doesn't like the English white wine, or does he just have so much of it being a prince that it just kind of gets thrown into the car so he can drive home after the party?
I'll go with the second. But no, like it's just like interesting. I mean, I think he has a lot of carbon footprint to make up for. So sure, he can run in Aston Martin with English wine. I think it's just like it's just like more like a funny aside. Like the positive side, a bit like Le Mans race that we talked about, it's just, it was front page-ish on the BBC website and everything. Like, again, what I like about this is that it just opened the conversation that there is alternative to, fossil fuel. Like it's just like, is white wine, English wine the way to go? Probably not, but just opening up, like there's more options out there. So I guess I like him for suggesting there are other things. Yeah.
Well,
I mean, it could be. Sorry, go ahead, John.
What I was going to say, it also ties back into, like, even during the darker days of the pandemic. I mean, there is excess wine out there, and not every wine makes it from the vine into somebody's glass. There is loss along the way, or surplus that just ages out. And like in France, turning the wine into hand sanitizer. So it's more showing that you shouldn't, I mean, it's not, I shouldn't say more showing, but it's another example of taking something that the original purpose is no longer, fit for the original purpose, but instead of just dumping it down the drain, there is something else you can do with it. And whether it's hand sanitizer or fuel for your bioethanol car, you can, there's usually a purpose for everything.
Well, I think in the Netherlands and in Norway, over 50% of new cars were electric. And there are a lot of European cities that are not allowing, diesel or high emission cars. Maybe this is a way for the wealthy collectors of old cars to still keep them running in some kind of way that will be acceptable, for society when 90% of the cars are electric. It could be a source of revenue or, something for wineries. We'll see. Let's see.
I'm reading really quickly that bioethanol is 90% alcohol. Is that completely off? Oh, for fireplace. Bioethanol for bio fireplace is 90% alcohol. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm just curious as to how do you take wine? How do you transform it to actually fuel a car? I mean, hand sanitizer would have to be distilled pretty extensively just to get the alcohol volume out. Mm-hmm. But I don't know about the bioethanol kind of thing. But I absolutely agree with Laurie. Anything to fucking bring the discussion out away from fossil fuel, I'm 100% behind it. Absolutely. Even if it's just a marketing gimmick and a fucking first world problem, absolutely fine.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again, our insiders, Laurie from Oushinery, Seb from Troly, and Jonathan from Bottlebooks. That was episode 18. We'll see you all again in a few weeks.
Nice one. Good seeing you guys. Catch you later.
Bye.
Bye.
Ciao.